All right, so it's 7 o'clock. So, in the interest of staying on time, I think we can get started. Chuck, Rebecca, you good with that? All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining the Rules and Bylaws Committee meeting this evening, the June meeting. Thank you to our board members that are here. I am going to turn it over to Will. Are you on so that you can explain sort of format?
Yeah, I think everybody here is a regular, so I'll give the condensed reminder that if you would like to participate, go to the reactions icon at the bottom of the screen, press the raise hand button, and only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're using an older version of Zoom, you'll need to go to the participants section where you'll find the raise hand feature there. And the chat is available for technical support only. It is not to ask questions or make comments. And we encourage you not to raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we might not be able to see you.
Great, thank you. I will, Chuck, I'll turn it over to you to sort of give a summary of where we last were as a committee when we met 2 months ago, and then
I guess I see
we'll jump in.
Cos.
Cos is here, Sherry.
Yeah. I think can everybody hear? I think what we tried to do is
Did we lose Chuck?
I think we did. I think he froze. I can call him.
I can jump in and then we'll let Chuck take over. Essentially, we had a lengthy discussion about, whether or not we wanted to keep the nominating committee or replace it with a different system. There were lots of concerns raised about whether or not we, ask questions and other aspects of the process. That's not something we're going to address tonight. Chuck's back, so we can turn it back to him.
yeah, sorry. I got cut off for some reason. Yeah. At today's meeting, we just wanted to really lay out a few possible frameworks for the election process, generalized frameworks, and then if we can agree on a recommendation to the board for our next board meeting this month on what the framework should be, then the next month we're going to come back and we'll flesh out in more detail the way that framework would operate. So I hope everybody can hear that. So we've taken Taina, Rebecca, and I have sort of taken it upon ourselves to just put together three different scenarios here that we can present and discuss them, and people may have other thoughts and other things, but we thought this sort of covered the kinds of ideas that were generally floating around from our previous meetings. And so why don't I ask, I guess we'll go through them one at a time here. And China, why don't you go ahead and talk about the first scenario.
Sure. So I just want to reiterate what Chuck said. I think that we had a very robust, healthy conversation at the last committee meeting. And so what we tried to do was create three scenarios that reflected the various perspectives that we heard. And so just wanted to reiterate that and just also remind people that the order in which we're presenting each of these scenarios has nothing to do with our personal opinions or anything like that. So I'll start with the nominating committee scenario.
Oh, and why don't we do the ones that we each wrote?
Well, now you made it obvious what I wrote. So,
sorry.
So I'm going to start with the nominating committee scenario. So I think that what we tried to do was think through the perspectives that were shared at the committee meeting, and also present scenarios to you all, to the board, that took into account what we have found to be the most common options with community boards in Manhattan. So So the list of these three both shares the perspective of sort of what we heard, but also is rooted in a lot of the research that actually Rebecca led, which was great in terms of research of all the community boards in Manhattan and what all the different community boards do with elections of board officers. And so, again, like the way we are going to talk about them has nothing to do either with our personal opinion or like the research that we did, but rather you'll sort of hear varying scales. So there are three scenarios. The first scenario being a nominating committee, which is what currently exists, obviously, as you all know, on the community board. But we also took into account in thinking through what the nominating committee looked like, actually taking into account some of the criticism, feedback, compliments that we heard from folks about what works well, what doesn't work well. And so in this scenario, the procedure would remain the same as it has been conducted by the board previously, with a number of improvements and clarifications. We heard a lot of perspective from board members. It was very helpful in terms of what was sort of confusing about the process or what could be clearer. And so this is a nominating committee scenario where we still have a nominating committee to select board officers, but there are actually improvements and clarifications based on what we heard from you all. In this scenario, all of the self-nominations for any office would be submitted in writing to the district manager at the time by the Monday at 5 p.m. following the September full board meeting when elections are taking place. Every candidate for each and every office would be granted interviews and giving equal consideration around time. Obviously, we are all operating under these Zoom restrictions and for the sort of foreseeable future. So these would be interviews that would happen on Zoom, take into account people's availability. Based on deliberations that nominating committee would have, the committee would put forward a candidate's name for a different office as long as that individual accepts that nomination, of course. And then two final things. In this scenario, any person interested in running for office for any of the open offices that does not want to go through the nominating committee can always be nominated from the floor at the October full board meeting, which, as many of you know, has happened in the past, for the past several elections, at least the last two. And any person not reported by the nominating committee may also be nominated from the floor at the October meeting. So that is the first scenario that keeps a nominating committee and that clarifies a few of the points that we heard from many of you at the last meeting.
There were a couple of other, I think, points for the nominating committee, which is that the chair of the nominating committee will run the November election. That's not something we've written into bylaws before. Prior to the September full board meeting, all board members, which at the September meeting is when we vote on the nominating committee, all board members will receive a document that details each board member's prior service on the nominating committee, the length of service of each board member, whether said board member has been a former board officer, and whether they are a current or former chair of a committee. Ambiguities as to the requirements of reporting a slate will be clarified at the next meeting if this is the option we go with, because we discussed some of those at the last meeting. Confidentiality of the committee will also be addressed at the next meeting if this is the chosen procedure. All board members will be eligible to serve on the nominating committee, provided that they do not intend to run for office that year, which is continuing what we have done previously. The selected members will vote on a committee chair the night of the September full board meeting, but we wanted to propose that maybe there needs to be some experience requirements to chair that committee, which we can determine again at the next meeting. No board member can serve on the committee 2 years in a row. And we can also discuss potentially having a full board approval or a full board vote of acceptance of the chair of the nominating committee again at the next meeting if this is the option. Those were just some of the initial things we thought were quite obvious that needed to be fixed. But we didn't want to waste time debating them at this meeting. All right.
Sherry, if it's okay with you, I think it would be best if we run through the three options and then sort of open for discussion. We had talked. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Chuck, if you want to take the next one,
Yeah.
or yeah.
Yeah. Yes. The next one is what we call the election committee, and some board, to the extent boards don't have nominating committees like our board, some have elections committees. And the election committee runs the election process for board officers. They don't make any recommendations or report a slate. The committee should consist of 5 or 7 members elected by the board at the September meeting, except a suggestion that we want to make is that all former board chairs will automatically be on the committee, the election committee. The committee will choose a chair after the committee has elected at that September meeting. The nominations will be sent to the board office and then sent to the committee. The committee would interview all candidates for all offices. And questions will be decided by the committee, and the same questions will be asked of all candidates for each office, obviously tailored to the office. The other wrinkle that we wanted to throw in for just consideration is that board members may send questions to be asked to the committee, which has discretion in choosing which of those questions they might want to ask. And then the committee minutes would be available for the October meeting of the board. And the minutes will contain the questions and answers from all of the candidates. And then at the October meeting of the board, we're suggesting that all candidates for each office will have a chance to speak for several minutes, and the process is run by the chair of the elections committee. There'll be no further questions. They're just making a speech because the questions and answers they will have seen in the minutes. And then there'll be no nominations from the floor at that point either. I mean, it's a process. The election process, anybody who wants it, goes through the process that I've described it. And then at the November board meeting, there'll just be an process run by the chair of the elections committee. So that's a different model, and it's one that sort of mixes in a few things, and those are the thoughts we had as to that particular situation. And I'll pass it on to Rebecca for the last scenario.
So we wanted, to try and think of every possible scenario. So the third one is kind of open, or what we'd call self-nominations, where, nominations are made from the floor. We can decide whether we want them to be done during the September or November meeting, because there'll be no committee process. They'll be known as open nominations, and we can even stipulate that they will only be self-nominations. During this period, the chair will ask for nominations from the floor. Again, we can decide whether or not we only want to have self-nominations or still have people nominate someone else to be an officer of the board. Members may nominate a candidate for one or more positions. As a courtesy to other board members should not offer up more than one candidate for a position until other members have had a chance to nominate a candidate of their choosing. Candidates from the floor may nominate themselves. They said that for one or more offices, if the bylaws allow. And a nominee can, if we do not only do self-nominations, a nominee can decline any nomination. The nominations will be taken in successive order. Nominees may remain in the meeting during the floor nominations, voting and counting. Floor nominees should meet the requirements stated in the bylaws if we want to set requirements. Because there are multiple different types of board officers. So if we're not going to have a committee that vets them, maybe we need to make sure there's some stipulations. We don't need to, though. And the kind of overall arching question is, who would run the process? If a sitting board chair may very well is very well likely to be a candidate again. I think so. We pose that to you: without a committee, who would run the election? Because I think we took everything everyone said at the last meeting, and we want to make sure elections are fair.
Yeah, and I would just, I think we should open it up to a discussion. I think just to add to what Rebecca was saying, we tried to be fair in terms of, as we were laying all of these out, really taking into account the scenarios that created questions like that last point that Rebecca made, that were sort of we felt like there was actually a lot of consensus and agreement about that being a big question mark. Who would run it if there's not an actual nominating committee or election committee? Is it the district manager? Does it make sense for it to be a district manager? If it's the sitting board chair, doesn't that have bias in it? And so I just want to make it clear that was the only scenario that we provided a question for, because we are actually trying to be reflective of what we actually heard from the last committee meeting, which is that would be like a big open question. And it's also something that we didn't see. And Rebecca did all of the, like I said earlier, all of the research about the different ways that Manhattan community boards run their board officer elections. And so we really didn't see, I think except for one, Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, a scenario where any board does it like that. So it just has open questions. That's not an opinion that we are giving as a committee, as co-chairs, but rather, there are no sort of examples for how that would run. So I think if we can unmute folks in the order in which their hands are up, which I believe Rita is first, if we could unmute her.
I am confused, and I don't understand how long this process has to take, but it was my understanding that we just wanted to know what the job was of the nominating committee when the nominations come and get interviewed. It had been previously that the committee of 7, the majority of the committee of 7, decided what the slate was going to be, and that was the slate that you voted on, except if there was any nomination from the floor that was not counted. So the problem here was not on how you get the nominees to the nominating committee, but what does the nominating committee do with the nominees? What do you just listen to their statistics, their vita and things like that? And if you find somebody objectionable, you can say that this person we don't feel that this person fits, if somebody is prejudiced or something, whatever it is. So what we really want to know is when the nominating committee has interviewed everybody, what do they do next? Just in a simple language, do they vote in the committee? Does the committee vote? If the committee doesn't vote, then that's what should be stated. That was where the problem was. The problem existed only, I've given you enough time. The problem has existed only because 7 people decided who was going to be the chair and the vice chair. That's the problem. So how will you address that problem?
Yeah, so if I could just jump in, Rita. So we tried to, I recognize that those are questions that are valid and important. We really tried to go back and look at, there were actually fundamental framework, process, structural issues that were brought up when we met as a committee by a multitude of board members, right? And
in the entire, or are we only talking about the nominating committee?
Right, but if and pardon me because I don't have the attendee list, but if you were at the last meetings, like there were entire structural, like there was questioning of the entire structure, right? And so what we were trying to do is we came up with 3 frameworks of the structure and how that could be improved or be different, rather than getting into the nuance of, and I do not disagree, should we decide that a nominating committee is what should remain, then yes, I agree that we have to have consistencies in terms of what is asked during these interviews, right? Like what is the protocol for how that nominating committee operates? But because we want to be respectful and responsive to what our fellow board members brought up during these meetings, it's important to us to also prevent alternatives to a nominating committee framework. I don't know, Chuck or Rebecca, if you want to.
And I will just add, so basically what happened was the earlier meeting, we had spent time, the three of us, going through all of the issues that we had heard about or, you know, saw that we wanted to address, like the ambiguities about whether or not the nominating committee must report at least one candidate for an office or not. The committee did not really want to discuss those details in order. They wanted to kind of express their feelings about the process in general, and there was a motion to disband the nominating committee that passed successfully. When we got to the full board, that motion was tabled as premature. So now we're not saying we have to make that same decision. I'm holding my tongue here, like that's not what it's about, but in order to make sure we can actually have an election process that we approve by the next election, we need to do it in a systematic way. And this meeting is not those details. It's just, are we doing keeping the nominating committee, knowing we're going to improve it? Are we switching to an election committee, or are we going to have a completely different kind of unprecedented process that, again, all three of them will need to discuss, and whichever one is the one that we choose will need to be amended, but we want to make sure we have a clear focus so that we don't waste time kind of amending the procedures for all three instead of the one.
I appreciate everything that this committee has done. I really do. If I'm going to vote on something that you are talking about, I need to see it. So I suggest that to every member of this committee that we get a copy of what you are proposing, and then we could actually offer some comments instead of coming here and finding out how you did what you did. I want to get to the Bill of Rights didn't take this long.
No, I think it did.
It did. I think it took a little longer.
You understand what I'm saying, Chuck?
No, I do, Rita.
We're at the same spot. This is fourth meeting at the same spot. And I mean, I think the co-chairs are doing a fabulous job and really researching it and getting into it. We want to not hear about it. We want to know what your research is. We want to be as smart as you. We want to make a good decision. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks, Rita.
Thanks.
Well, I guess I can I'm just pulling up my research and all the other boards, which is that the majority of boards do have a nominating. I'm kind of sorry, I will have to double check, but basically the two common procedures of Manhattan community boards, we did not look at in other boroughs, was either they have a nominating committee that essentially functioned like us. They had an election committee that functioned the same way as the nominating committee, or they had an election committee in the way that Chuck described. The majority had a nominating committee or a committee that functioned to that extent. That's a normal practice. That's what we do. That's what most boards do. There were a smaller group of people boards who had an election committee where that committee just their purpose was running the election, making sure it was fair. They did not report a slate, right? Then there was like one board, and I'm gonna try and find it, that just had a completely kind of different process.
Yeah.
And that's where these three options came from. I think we should move on.
Look, I think Rita, I mean, we're really trying to just say, okay, do we want to keep a nominating committee the way we've had it? And with some changes as the way you talked about, and that would be one of the big changes, or do we want to go to some other model, be it a committee that doesn't do anything except sort of just run the mechanics of the election, and or no committees, because that was something that came up. And I think I think the general consensus of the full board at the last meeting on this was that, we want to have some kind of committee here. We just don't want to leave it as a free-for-all. That was my sense of it. But that's what we're here for. We want to hear from the folks all you folks and see if we can recommend something to the board. And then if we recommend that, well, we're going to continue with the nominating committee, but we're going to then look into the mechanics of how it operates and what it does. That's all, then that'll be for the next meeting. That's the way we're looking at it. We'll have a next meeting early in July, so we can have the full board meeting in July, then say, okay, this is how we're going to amend the bylaws. This is what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You, Ed Herzog?
Before I call on Ed, I forgot to just reiterate one thing that I said at the last meeting, which is the main difference was in a lot of the other community boards, it was the chairperson who nominated the members of the nominating committee. The sense we got from that meeting was that was not something that this board would be interested in, but I just wanted to make sure I restated that. So let's go to Ed.
Yeah. Why don't we go to next? Is it Ed Hartzog next?
Yep.
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Taina. Thanks, Rebecca. I'm going to come at it from a different place. Having been a member of the board for a while and having gone through the process and having dealt with elections in a lot of variety of ways, I'm just going to throw this out there. I do echo what Rita did say. It would be easier if we did have the three options, and forgive me if you put them out there and I didn't see them, it being a user error. But if you had them written and I could print them and look at them, it would make it easier. But I can hear what you're saying, and frankly, where I'm going is I'm for simplicity. I mean, really, I find that in my other job that I enjoy as much as this one, I find that the acrimony is tiresome, but it's there. But what I found in my experience is that acrimony, the kind that we experience as a board, which is endemic and emblematic of America, is driven by a quick to judge, which is New York City. That's okay, but it's an opaqueness. It's an unknowing of things. And so that's why after 12 years, I am really anti-nominating committee for two reasons. One, with all due respect to everyone, and everyone to me, is you don't need me and I don't need you to tell me who it is that I'm voting for. We're all very, very smart people, and it's an internal process. And I'm for simplicity. So I'm going to look back on an organization I belonged to in college. I belonged to a fraternity. It had about 50 members, same as our board. And it was a pretty simple and very effective kind of organization. And it functioned very similarly. Sorority or fraternity, same kind of thing, such intramural battles. My point is this, our elections ran this way. You had our weekly meeting, our monthly meeting, whatever it was. There we were in one room like we do here. We sat around, people raised their hand, they nominated them, Ed, you recognize, hi, I'll nominate Chuck for president. Hi, Taina, I see you. Yeah, hi, I'll nominate Michelle for, intramural chair, social secretary, all these sorts of things. Nominations get tossed out right there. And then we'll have to tweak it, but what would happen is if you get nominated for president, we went upstairs. So I remember we got nominated, three of us upstairs. We went to one of the rooms, and then right there in the meeting, everybody had at it. So, Chuck, Diana, Sherry, Craig, Felicia, Ed, everybody said, I like so-and-so. I like this one. I like that one. Hey, this happened here. This happened there. They said good, bad, indifferent, everything about you, silent, out there. You weren't there. You were removed. Then you had a secret kind of ballot. We used to have a thing you passed around. I'm sure we could figure something out here. But what I'm driving at in the long story is I really would favor, having been through it, and just to kind of take the temperature down and just do away with a lot of the conspiracy theories that emanate just from silence and not knowing. And I would just be an advocate for simplicity, 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 simplicity. So I guess what I'm saying is I'd probably go for the third scenario where there's no
Okay.
nominating committee. I would say that the vice chair would run the meeting. I would say that, it's you nominate from the floor. There you
If
go.
the vice chair is running to be vice chair again.
Well, then you come up with somebody else, or you pick somebody from the floor. But
Okay.
something there. But the point is, I would just go as much as we can. That would be what I would vote for. Everything else, I'm going to abstain on. So I know everybody gets angry, and maybe I'll if you indulge me, maybe I'll come and I'll do a thing on abstention. But I don't think you can abstain enough. And when people say that to me, who are on the call, with all due respect, you can tell me that to your face. Every turns blue, but I'll abstain where I think it's appropriate. My point is, I'm going to tell you straight up front, I'm for simplicity. I'm going to vote for the most simple upfront process we can come up with without a lot of things. I think because we are one of probably the smartest board with graduate degrees, et cetera, nothing wrong with that. But sometimes I think we over whatever, I'm going to nominalize the word anyway, but I think we overthink it. I think we overthink it too much. And I think that's it, and I'll stop. I've gone on way too long.
No, it's okay. Thank you, Ed. I think, just to be clear, by the way, I think the clearest, and my graduate degree does not give me, is not what got me to say this, but I think we overcomplicate a ham sandwich, as I like to say. In the chat, if you look right now, Will has dropped a link. I just want to be clear. We thought about this a lot. We took time making a chart. We thought it would. So if everyone wants to click on that, you will actually see the 3 options laid out.
Oh, great.
We thought it'd be sort of a better conversation to read through it, as opposed to, we didn't want this to become sort of like a nitpicking every word in each column. So I hope that's not what this becomes. We want to continue to move along and hear your perspectives, but please click in the chat and you will actually see the graph and the options that we laid out.
And I will just say, we're not the same as other nonprofit boards because we technically are kind of a public entity, a city agency. We are not permitted to have secret ballots for elections. There are a lot of other factors to being a community board that can't be replicated in other boards. So
well, that's fine. That may be fine. That's fine. We don't have to. I'm actually not for the secret ballot, so I would actually say even better. So then I would say you have the nominations, you say all the horrible things you want to say about people behind their back when they're not there, and then they come back, you vote in there for them to see it right there. So I'm all for that. I'm not for secret ballots. So giddy up. I echo that, Rebecca, and I'm all on board with that. No secret anything. Everything's out in public, so everybody sees where you are, where you come from, and what you say. I'm all for that.
Great. And I know that Jane Partial has to leave, so if she wants to speak, can we unmute her? If she has to go, that's okay too. Can we unmute Jane?
Yeah, unmuted now. Thank you, Rebecca. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry. I thought the meeting started at 6:30 anyway, anyway, I've been on the board, as all of you know, for probably way too long. I've been on the nominating committee a couple of times. I think the nominating committee, maybe with a few tweaks, is the best way to go. You need a screening process. And we all know that candidates can be nominated from the floor. We have our own Alita, who happened to become our board chair, and a very good board chair, through that process. I know people feel that, for instance, I saw this myself in my most recent nominating committee experience, that people were annoyed that maybe I had a prejudice against one person who came before us. But that's the way the cookie crumbles. I mean, none of us are immune from bringing our backgrounds and our experiences and who we know to the nominating committee experience if we're lucky enough to be elected to the nominating committee. So this idea that on the nominating committee you're supposed to be as pure as Snow White in your opinions is kind of ludicrous, given that we're all political appointments. So I am in favor of the nominating committee with some tweaks. I think we need another meeting on this before we have a vote on which option to go for, so that perhaps
Jane, the problem is we can't have another meeting. I don't think we can fit it in because we need to decide on one of the 3 options today, because then the next meeting in July, we have to then flesh that out so we can go to the full board, because we have to by the full board meeting in July, since we don't have a full board meeting in August, and the election process starts in September. So we really, that's where we are, just in terms of timing.
Well, I'm sorry, I won't be able to vote, Chuck. I'm really sorry. I would vote to continue with the nominating committee and tweak it to make it perhaps slightly more democratic.
Okay, thank you.
The only other option
I
would
think I
be-
can stay for a little longer, so I'm going to stay for a little longer.
The only other option would be we'd have to get permission from Russell to have a special meeting of the board to vote on amendments if we need more time, but we're really hoping we can get, a decision on one of the options
Can
tonight.
we unmute Michelle just so we move along? And I know folks have to go since it started late.
Michelle, who are you going to unmute?
Yes,
Michelle?
thank you. I agree with what Jane said. And as I've expressed before, I'm in favor of the nominating committee. However, I just want to say simplicity is in the eyes of the beholder. And sometimes it's worthwhile when you have three options, for example, rather than discussing the one that you like the best, sometimes it's worth looking at others and seeing why you might like them the least. So I'm going to start with that for the moment. And the third one, which is a self-nominating committee, or self-nominating from the floor, or others can nominate you, no particular committee, a board person, we don't know if it would be a chair, whoever would lead it, et cetera, et cetera. To me, that is an extremely complicated, difficult, and awkward thing to do, because you're throwing it open to 50 people who you then have to hear from. And then you will have 50 people discuss the process, what they want to do, who they want to nominate, who wants to second, who wants to accept. Then you have to have all 50 people determine the bios, the curriculum vitae of each of the applicants. To me, that's a far more complicated and problematic process. So I don't see the benefit to that at all. The second option, which was the election committee, correct me, you faded out, Chuck. I'm not sure if I heard this correctly. Did you say that would be made up of previous board chairs?
Not totally, no, not totally, but the previous board chairs would be on it, but there would be other people on it too.
Okay, well, I don't know how many people you're proposing would be on this, but I see no reason that a previous board chair, to my mind, would have a preferential spot here. I understand the desire to ask the same questions of each of the applicants during the interview process. That could be incorporated in any process that you choose. I understand that the proposal to accept questions from all of the board members to possibly be incorporated into that interview process, that could be fine. However, even with that, you have to understand that if 25 or 50 people or 10 people or 4 people, whoever submits those questions, you are still going to have a group that will make a choice as to which of those questions will be proposed. The likelihood being that not all of them, in the interest of time, could be proposed, especially if you're asking the same question, and maybe there are 10 questions that were proposed of each of 5 nominees. Now you've got 50 questions. From my mind, I'm eliminating the election committee in my head. I'm eliminating the self-nominating committee in my head. And I would just like to summarize a bit the nominating committee, with which I have experience. I was on it twice. One time I chaired it. It ran beautifully. It ran smoothly each time. The nominating committee, each of the individuals is nominated and voted on by the full board. So you're not pulling them out of thin air. Often, if you want 7 and you have 10 nominees or 12 nominees, those, with a plurality, I mean, the others get eliminated. So that in and of itself is a democratic process. Once those nominees are together, they have the right to elect their own chair, to pick their own chair. We traditionally do that the same night. I think it's a wise thing to do. It has not been a complicated process. 7 people get together in the corner, they make a choice, they have a brief discussion, and it happens. When you get to the point where they're accepting nominations, which are submitted to the board office and then forwarded, applications, and then forwarded to the nominating committee meets and reviews the applications, and then feels the necessity, which I think correctly, to interview each of the applicants. And each of the times that I experienced that, it was done in a very friendly, forthcoming, intelligent, non-abusive, a sincere desire to get information, looking at past performance to see who might be the most, not necessarily qualified, because I believe any of the 50 people on our board are qualified to do any of the executive actions. But it's a matter if they're applying for this job at this moment, at this time, who appears to be the best person for that job. Now, the reason for confidentiality, and I know that if we went with this process, there should be some tweaking. That's fine. I'm not against that. The confidentiality issue, I want to repeat, is actually for the applicants. It is not for the committee. And I'll give you a perfect example. There was a person at our last meeting who told all of us how that she was reluctant to ever apply again because she applied once and she was turned down and her feelings were hurt, and et cetera, et cetera. I want to tell you that that person was at my nominating committee, and nobody on this board would have ever known in a million years that that person was ever an applicant, because there were no leaks from my committee and no one knew who applied until that person revealed it that night. So it was revealed, it was not revealed, it was kept confidential by the committee for exactly the reason that person expressed. Everybody who was not chosen was spared any embarrassment. Some might feel some might feel none. After all, it isn't really a reflection on that individual person because we're all qualified. It's a need at the time, like everything else. But that would never have come out. The confidentiality is for the applicants. And I don't like the word secrecy. There is no secrecy. It's a respect for the applicants and to be confidential. And the reason we're questioning this process, which has worked very, very well, is because it was blown up at the last election. And because it was blown up and the guidelines were not followed, I think almost for its own sake of blowing it up, because no real reason was presented to me for it to have been blown up, but because it was, now we went back and questioned every bit of it. To sum up, of the 3 proposals that are on the table tonight, the nominating committee for me makes the most sense, bearing in mind that nominations can be made from the floor. So while it is the function of a nominating committee to present a slate, that's why you have a nominating committee, that slate is not necessarily the elected offices. On both my experiences of the nominating committee, we had nominations from the floor. In one case, we didn't even come up with a suggested nominee for, I believe it was vice chair. I don't recall, I think it was vice chair. We didn't even make a recommendation. We took all nominations from the floor. It ran smoothly, it ran fine. I have experience with that. I'm on the board for 16 years. It has run smoothly. I'm sure nothing is perfect. I'm sure it could be tweaked, but to throw it out for these other 2 suggestions or any other, I've been racking my brain, I can't think of a better way, I think would be a big, big mistake. So thank you for listening, and I hope you take my comments in consideration.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm going to jump ahead because we have a member of the public who is not a community board member that I would like to allow to speak first. Can we unmute Boaz? Boaz looks very happy that he doesn't have to wait.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I want to mention that you are one of the good people in whenever you see someone from the public raise his hand, you always bring him in front of the line. So first thing first, I do believe that the nominate committee is the number one option. You have, and with a small tweak, the first thing, I think that you have a lot of people that have been here for many years in the community board, and so they know what should be the goals of the community board. They should basically start with the goals and go backward, meaning that I'm sure that Michelle, Rita, the people that have been here for many years knows what is realistic for the coming year, what is realistic for the next 2 years, and so on. So they need to basically have a very, very specific set of goals and go backward. And when I say backward, what are the type of people they need to have in the community to basically get closer to this goal? That's number one. The second thing, I think that the attention is the new currency. On Monday, earlier this week, it was a great weather in New York City, lots of events going on, the city was buzzing, lots of sport events, and Rita Popper was able to bring a full room in Upper East Side from now to hear what she has to say. So I think that the second thing that you guys need to do is whenever people coming to the community to be in the community board, you want to be able to make sure that they are able to fill up a room, meaning bring them in person and see that they can bring someone. They are basically representing someone. My wife, I cannot represent my wife. My wife will, let's say, Boaz is speaking on his behalf. So we are the biggest community, right? I mean, Upper East Side, the biggest community, I don't know, I think in the entire US or something like that. 200,000 people, if I'm not mistaken. You want to be able to bring people that are able to bring, I don't know, 20 people, 30 people, fill up a room. That's my take. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Boaz.
you. And I will say that you actually raised something that's very important that we didn't mention earlier. We need to really be considerate of the fact that term limits have now been implemented. The board and so we need to make sure that there's a way, that the knowledge of people like Rita and Michelle and Chuck and other members that Boaz mentioned lives on in some form, whatever side. That's something that needs to, we're hoping to be able to come up with a resolution that will last, stand the test of time. All right, so let's go to the next member, Sherry Wiener.
Thanks. A couple of comments. One that I think needs to be addressed is the fact that when I was approached to run for chair, which was in the summer, I was told I had to immediately start campaigning, which became apparent as I called people on the community board and they said, oh, but I've already committed to another candidate. So that I think is very troublesome that we don't even wait. The tradition with this community board, it's so politicized that we don't even wait for the nomination committee to start. And then and then I have to disagree with Jane. What is the point of having people on a nominated committee if their minds are made up prior to even hearing the candidates? I mean, this community board is unfortunately so divided into groups that you could tell from who was elected to this year's nominating, you knew who they were going to vote for the most part. I don't say everybody, but the majority of people who were on the nominating committee were well known for supporting one candidate or another. So that I think is a real problem. I think that people who serve on the nominating committee should not have publicly stated their support for a candidate before they even have a chance to hear the candidates. And then I guess this will be in the next meeting, but We had a problem this year where our chair was making the rules for the election. He was planning to run it himself, even though he was running for office. And then he was precluding candidates from speaking. I certainly think anybody who is either nominated by the nominating committee or self-nominate should have an opportunity to address the board. How would we know what people stand for? So I don't have a problem with a nominating committee, but it has to be a neutral committee and not a committee, as I said, whose members already know who they're going to vote for before they, before they hear from the candidates. Otherwise, it's just a waste of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. And I just actually want to, just before we move forward, it's really important for me to speak to that from a personal perspective. Sherry, having been somebody who was a brand new first term, first year board member that was chosen to be on a nominating committee and went into a nominating committee process knowing not a single person that was interviewing for any of those board officer positions, I would actually disagree with you that by virtue of being on a nominating committee, you have a perspective or an opinion. Like, I knew no one that I was interviewing. I
didn't say 100%, but many of the people on the
sure, but I can say that the year that I was on, of 7 members, 2 of us, myself and Takako Kono, were brand new board members who knew no one and took the process actually quite seriously and did not. So, and that's actually why I feel very strongly that if we choose a nominating committee process, like when I talked about how, the semantics of what questions we ask and who's on it, it's very important to me that we actually have neutral perspective. And I agree with you, Sherry, that frankly, now I'm in my second term and I do have opinions and perspectives because I've gotten to know all of you and I've worked with all of you and I have an opinion about everything from, whether you chair a committee or how you participate in meetings. So I think you are right, but that's also why I feel very strongly that new board members should be part of the process. So, but I just wanted to clarify because it is not the case that every nominating committee by definition has a bias. I did not have one. I
did 2 out of the 7. The other 5 probably did.
You're probably right. Well,
that's why that's why when we pick our nominating committees, we should try to pick people who are neutral and not part of one group or another group so we can get the best qualified.
Very fair.
Sherry raised another very important point that I just want to reiterate for the people who have their hands up. If you're supporting the third option, we really need to have a way to make sure a current chair is not going to run the election. And so if you have any ideas
or vice
how
chair
we could possibly have this I don't want to say free for all, that sounds biased, but if that's what this committee ends up deciding, there needs to be a way to account for what Sherry said. And I think that her comments could also, I love you, Will, but could be addressed to the district manager. We need to have someone who is voted on, I think, by the full board who runs the election with no conflict of interest. So if you want to support the third option, because the 3 of us were kind of at a loss of what we could do because it's not really been done by other boards. So I encourage you to think of that and mention it when you support that option. Because
agree.
I'm curious to hear.
It's Craig next here, I think. Craig.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm Eric. Hello, everyone. First off, I want to thank all of the chairs for putting together that chart and doing all of the work. As someone who just went through a process on transportation where I did a lot of reconnaissance beforehand, I really appreciate when things are laid out neatly and in an organized fashion. So thank you for that. I just wanted to ask a few questions because I admittedly am a bit intrigued by the election committee option. So I guess, first off, do you know offhand which other community boards utilize such a committee approach?
Rebecca, do you want to take that one?
If you give me 2 minutes, I'll be able to tell you.
Okay, I'll come back to that. Okay. And if I'm understanding it correctly, is an election committee essentially more transparent or even fully transparent or comparatively transparent, at least compared to our nominating committee, if all responses are are being made available to the full board, or would there be other confidential aspects?
No, we were,
I think
I think it was laid it out. It wouldn't be confidential. I think it would be basically transparent, Craig.
Okay, that's how I was hearing. I just wanted to confirm that. And then I guess just on a broader level, were there any discussions regarding minimum qualifications or specific qualifications for any of the positions, whether it be a minimum number of years served for a chair or specific experiences required to be secretary, to ensure that it's someone who's able to jump right in, be able to do the job and do it well? And would that be in any scenario, would something like that be potentially available as an option?
so. I will say, I think with term limits, we're kind of in a tricky situation. We no longer have, board members. I think of Barbara Chalky. She was on the board for 40 years and she was chair. I mean, Chuck, we had Barry. I don't know all my board history because I'm a newer person. But we can't really account for that, I think. I will say personally, as the secretary, I do think there are skills that need to, there are traits for that role in particular that are appropriate to kind of look for. But I think in terms of tenure of service on the board, it just might be a little tough to mandate that into bylaws given the new circumstance.
Yeah. Okay, and that's fine. It was more just a question as to whether it would be something that we could consider and not a demand in any.
Yeah, and look,
I think that's also, sorry, Tina, that's also, I think, part of why nominating committees seem to be the overwhelming majority of what boards use to kind of account for that. I do think if that's the decision, if that's the option we go for, we could maybe consider stipulating requirements for certain roles in the bylaws. If that's something the committee wants to do, we don't have to. But I think really, again, we just want to get a consensus as to which method we're going to pursue.
Yeah, and again, I think that's something that could be done in any which scenario. I would imagine that I would hope that anyone who would be running for a chair or first vice chair position would be someone who served at least a full term on the board, because it gives them enough experience and enough knowledge of our processes and our personalities and just our approaches to how we conduct our business, and making sure that everyone is at least somewhat familiar with all the issues that our board and our committees deal with on a regular basis. But beyond that, I guess here's what I'm thinking. So the tenets that in my mind that should be prioritized are transparency, neutrality, and straightforwardness. And I'm purposely not using the word simplicity, but I think straightforwardness is where I'm going with this. So I want to start with transparency, which I feel very strongly about. And I truly believe that the need for confidentiality for the nominating committee in the past has really not been ideal. And I think it's promoted suspicion and dissension. And given that our board must be fully transparent in nearly every other situation for everything else that we conduct business with, aside from when we go into executive committee, I don't know that having an elected board being done behind closed doors is really a good look. And then just looking back at what got us here, I think we all seem to agree that the status quo isn't exactly sustainable, whether we're talking about something more significant or even incremental changes. But I think we've all found that it's a confusing process, starting with the nominations for the nominating committee, which I just always tend to laugh at when thinking about and talking about that. And I also believe that it results in opportunities for potential biases to be introduced if members attempt to recruit members of the nomination committee. And that's something that I've experienced past and haven't been comfortable with. And then the nominating committee, as I said, conducts business largely behind closed doors with confidentiality required. And then the process requires, then the process of reporting out a slate can get potentially upended by open nominations for the floor, where the nomination committee is essentially bypassed if someone is to get nominated from the floor and doesn't put their name in the hat while the nominating committee is conducting their business. So I don't like the idea that there's a vetting process for some, and then someone else can strategize and then just get nominated from the floor after the nominating committee does its work. So as I'm understanding it, these problems would be potentially addressed by an election committee that's more transparent than our nominating committee has been. And that would allow everyone to be on equal footing in terms of common questions. And hopefully that would be able to eliminate surprises and biases. And I think we should discuss some of the details, like some of the questions I raised before. And also, I think whether it be an election committee or nominating committee, just finding ways to codify in our bylaws diversity in terms of CB8 experience in whatever committee we end up with, beyond potentially having past chairs included, which I don't even know that I agree with that. But I think overall, at least where I am at this moment, I think it would be worth considering this election committee as a change that is significant, but not a radical change. It still has a formal process in place and would still allow us to be able to hopefully arrive at good decisions for the board and position ourselves to have a executive committee that would be able to serve us well. So that's where I am right now.
Thanks, Craig.
I quickly went through my document, and I'll make sure to include in the minutes what I reported at the previous meeting. But so CB6 has an elections committee, but it functions exactly the same way as our nominating committee, thereby like it proposes a slate. CB7, CB9, and CB10 have election committees. The majority of the other 12 boards, or the other boards out of 12, have a nominating committee like ours. CB2 and CB11, I don't have them in front of me, but that's because they were so different. They were kind of the outliers we were talking about. But again, the majority of Manhattan community boards have a nominating committee that functions like ours. The main difference I addressed earlier, which is that usually the chair picks them.
Great.
All right,
Thank you for that, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Craig.
But I promise I'll get that to you. Let's go to Felice.
First, I just want to thank everybody for the hard work and that you've put into this, and how thoughtfully you've laid out the various options and clarification on it. I think this is really helpful, and I can tell that a lot of time and effort went into this. I think option 3 is the worst of the options, and it seems to me that we all agree that complete chaos doesn't really work well. But I think some kind of combination of option 1 and option 2 make the most sense. If you can select a slate of candidates in the nominating committee and you've rejected someone as being non-qualified for whatever reason, they could still be nominated on the floor. So kind of what's the purpose of having gone through the whole nominating committee process? I like the concept of having a set time period where everybody has to make their decision about whether they want to run for office or have somebody nominate them to run for office. Everybody gets asked the same questions and responds to the same questions. It's an open process where there are minutes, and so you can review in advance of voting what everybody has said and what they think about it. I think that creates a fair process where everybody gets to hear from everyone else. The nominating committee can select a slate that maybe has multiple people for the same office. But then you're kind of just back at the election committee. And what if that kind of the few people who are on the nominating committee don't necessarily represent the perspectives of the entire board? Maybe the entire board, unless there's some glaring reason why you don't think somebody is qualified to serve in one of those positions, I would support the open and transparent process. And then I like the concept then of no nominations from the floor, because I think that just gets chaotic. And then what's the point of the nominating committee if you can nominate someone from the floor who the nominating committee might not have selected or intentionally didn't select?
Fair. Thank you, Felice. And just to be clear, because we sort of like named the different scenarios and we tried to be fair in naming them. When you say you prefer the open process, are you referring to option 2?
Option 2.
Okay,
Yes.
the election committee. Thank you. Well, what one could interpret option 3 as being an open process, right? So I'm just making sure.
I like the elections committee. I'll put it that way.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Can we unmute Cos, please?
Oh, I thought Alita was before me. Oh, she's in now. I'm sorry.
Wrong? Was it? So I don't want to be rude to Alita. I think it was you and then Alita. Am I right?
Okay. I'm sorry, Chuck, but I have to go with your nomination, the election. The nominating committee, I would like to see for the past 10 years who has been on the nominating committee. And I think what you're going to see is basically the same people alternating every second year. So having somebody not having served, you don't think so, Chuck? I may be a mistake.
We did stipulate in our report for the nominating committee that before we vote on any future nominating committee, every board member will receive a document that states who has served on the nominating committee previously, when they have served, if they chaired it, etc. So that's something, no matter what option we go with, because I think it's the same thing for an election committee. That's something we really want to fix.
Okay, well, it doesn't matter because I'm against the nominating committee right down, so I vote that one down completely. As far as the election, I mean, that's the most fair. We have everybody who wants to run puts their name down. We have the debates. Everybody knows what their thinking is, what their feeling is, and what they've done, what they intend to do. And with the open from the floor, so as I think it was, who was it, Felice, we have a nominating committee. They came out with a slate. At the last minute, somebody gets nominated from the floor. There goes the whole month's worth of work. If somebody has been canvassing the members of the board and does not nominate themselves to be interviewed by the nominating committee, they're nominated on the floor. They've been canvassing for the past 2, 3, 4 months. So I vote the nominating committee down, and I go for the election committee.
Thank you, Kaz. Can we unmute Alita? And then before we go to Michelle, who already spoke, and I'm happy to have you speak again, that's fine. I just want to acknowledge that Vanessa Aronson joined from the community board. And I know Sahar, I know how intimidating it can be to be a new board member. So thank you for joining. You're like really getting in the weeds here. And I know it can be intimidating to like raise your hand, but I would love to hear your perspective if you have one. If not, no pressure. But if we could unmute Alita, please.
Thank you. And thank you to the members of the committee for working hard and planning and trying very, very hard to be organized and making valid suggestions. And thank you, Kaz, for being courteous, although you were first. I have trouble both with the nominating committee and the election committee, but I think it should maybe be some kind of hybrid. And my concern is exactly what Shari had mentioned. It's almost a race to the polls by people calling and canvassing in July or maybe even June and getting commitments that board members are either ethically reluctant or spiritually or some other reason to be reluctant to change what they've made as a commitment. And then if those people are on the nominating committee and they're endorsing or supporting the only person that's going to be nominated for a particular position, it's a stream of bias that will affect or infect the entire board. And I know that there was canvassing in other years done in early summer. And I know that people, because they told me, not about me and not about the person I was running against, but they told me that they made commitments and they could not or would not change them. So I have a lot of trouble with that. Maybe if there's a nominating committee, maybe they don't nominate chairs, because having served as chair, I know how extensive the position is, how much responsibility there is, and how much influence there could be. And to have a group of people, some of whom may have preconformed notions of whom they'd like to see as chair going in there, I just am really concerned about a nominating committee then endorsing a slate with only one person. I think that we need more time for this, especially if we don't have a nominating committee and it's business as usual. I know that there's an election in September. I don't see how this could be done and really done fairly and openly. There were so many people attending last time. I don't know where everyone is this time, but I'm sure that with 50 members of the board, there would be 50 different opinions about the correct way to run it. I'd also like to, and I just forgot what I was going to say, confidentiality. Maybe if there are questions for applicants, the people who are then reported out by the nominating committee, those questions and answers be released to the board members. The questions and answers from people who weren't reported out not be given out for the reason that Michelle suggested, which is that the person who had applied and was not selected, it was completely confidential and no one knew about it. So it preserves some sense of, I guess, not embarrassment or sense of respect or something from applicants. And then I do think there should be questions and answers for people running. I know it was a disaster a couple of years ago, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are ways to fix it. And I think it could be fixed and should be fixed, because the more information board members have, I think the better the process is. I don't think that I have anything else. I guess those are my real concerns, is maybe, again, some kind of hybrid process where it's transparent, where there's lots of opportunities for questions, and where there's no bias coming in. And I don't know how to prevent that. I know I asked the candidates not to start campaigning early on, but they went ahead anyway. So I don't know what there is that could be done, but the sense of bias going in is really concerning to
No,
me.
that's fairly fair. And I just
will
like a
say-
follow-up question, Alita, to what you said. I'm just curious, and I'm not giving my opinion. Genuinely asking, the challenges that you mentioned about folks running for positions and politicking and making calls, I'm just curious, wouldn't that happen with option 3 anyway?
It might, but then you don't have a committee making a decision about who should be running, especially if they're only choosing one person, which I don't think they should be. I think there should be multiples of multiple people are interested in running. But yes, there's always a problem. And I don't know what you do, because a lot of it is good faith. You can ask and require that nominating committees not have made commitments, but I'm not sure. And it's a question I ask at openings of mediations is, do you have settlement authority? And people will swear up and down that they do, but then they actually don't. And when push comes to shove, they don't have the authority. So they didn't actually tell the truth. And I'm not saying that anyone on the board would do that, but
I've looked into this. There is no, I understand your concerns and Sherry's concerns. There is no way that via the bylaws, we can dictate private conversation. So unfortunately, we're in a situation where we can, suggest as maybe best practices, you don't ask for support before XY date, but there's actually no way in which we can stipulate that as a requirement in our bylaws. So
I know, and it
I understand some concerns, but that's something we can't. And for the questions, I hear what you're saying, but that's also something we don't want to bring up during this meeting, because that's a whole other topic, and we're just running out of time.
Okay, other people addressed it, so I thought I'd throw my 2 cents.
That's helpful.
Yeah. But in terms of, you're right, you can't police conversations, but you can ask, and hopefully people would tell the truth, whether they've made a commitment either formally or informally to somebody. But maybe the answer is to just not have it be one person per position coming out of the nominating committee. And then for nominations from the floor, yes, definitely it could be manipulated. The year that I ran. I did not go before the nominating committee. I don't know if the person I was running against did. We were both nominated from the floor. There was no one put out by the nominating committee for chair that year. But I just think that the idea of people going in, having made commitments officially or unofficially in their heads, and then voting for a particular person and having that be the person that the board is voting for is really a problem for me.
Got it.
So I've said that, and I don't want to be redundant. I know.
No, I appreciate it. I was just asking the follow-up question because
no, that's okay.
I genuinely think that that's going to be an issue in any scenario, right? Like people are going to run for something, they're going to make calls. We all have each other's numbers. We know how it works. So, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah, because it's different when the person getting the call and making a commitment is then selecting potentially the officer.
Fair.
Thank you.
Can we unmute Vanessa? And Michelle, we'll go to you next, I promise, just because Vanessa hasn't spoken.
Thanks so much for the chance to speak. And my apologies to everyone for missing the first hour of the meeting. I had a prior commitment that I wasn't able to get out of. But without the benefit of having heard the conversation to this point, I guess first, though, I just want to say, like, thank you so much to the Rules and Bylaws Committee for all of the work that you put into this. The 3 options, each one of them is a huge improvement from where we were. So I'm so grateful for that. And just even the way you laid it out is such a great way to frame this conversation. And that's just awesome. And I hope we can kind of do more of that in the future and when other things come up like this. Again, without the benefit of the full conversation, personally, I was drawn to the election committee because it feels the most transparent to me. It feels like it has some structure to it. To try to control complete chaos, but does still seem completely transparent. And I guess I wonder if that's something we could try as an alternative and then see what happens. And then if there needed to be more control, moving back to the nominating committee. One question, though, I did have about the description in the nominating committee was the note that says that confidentiality of the committee will be addressed at the next meeting. So I was just wondering if someone, again, I'm sorry if this was already addressed.
No, basically so in the beginning of the meeting, we kind of said we're in a time crunch because we're going to have an election the process will begin in September. We didn't want details like that to be addressed at this meeting. If the nominating committee is the majority opinion to continue, if we have a vote to support that, that was an issue we wanted to make sure we noted that we heard before, right? And that will need to be readdressed if that is the kind of the item that if that's the option we go with. It's just, we didn't want this to become we hate the nominating committee because of the confidentiality, because theoretically we could get rid of the confidentiality and still have a nominating committee. So that was more of a preserving of time.
Yeah. And I just and Vanessa, just speaking like personal perspective here, not as a coach or having been on the nominating committee as a brand new board member, it was the part of the nominating committee process that like frustrated me the most. I did not understand it. I did not understand why I couldn't talk to anybody that wasn't on the nominating committee or ask any questions. It felt very like unnecessarily, like, I'm not going to say undemocratic, but I just did not understand like why I was part of a public community board and I was on this nominating committee and I couldn't talk to anybody about it except for the 7 people that were on it. So, and I wasn't the only one that felt that way. Like, again, to Rebecca's point, like we heard that loud and clear. I feel very strongly and passionately about that, but like there are issues with that and that it leads to confusion if you are brand new on a nominating committee and you accept that like privilege to serve on it and then you feel like you can't ask anyone questions about what's happening. So
I'm very glad I asked this question because that does, I wouldn't say that shifts completely where my head is at, but like, again, to me, that was the most difficult part of that process and having not ever served on it, but being a candidate myself didn't feel like, even more so that opens up my eyes to what I would be where I would be flexible voting here. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Yeah, and I will say the other aspect of why I didn't want to kind of make a decision like that when we were describing the nominating committee is there's so many nuances. Like Do we want it to be less confidential, but if someone is not picked and does not want that to be a fact, do we want to allow them, you know, to so there's a lot there, and that's a whole other meeting, and that's not something we can now. And then I raised my hand because I wanted to kind of step away and share this for 1 second.
I just wanted to
to
address
say-
one thing with Vanessa, just one thing before you go, Rebecca. Vanessa, there were also other things that were, I think, like, again, both important to me and important to other fellow colleagues on the board that are not necessarily here right now, which is like the like equity in the process, right? So like when I was and I'm just going to make a TFA reference because we're both former TFAers, I think it's unacceptable to interview candidates for anything and not make sure that you're asking the exact same questions to every single candidate, right? And that is not something that we had written in the process. And I feel very strongly that if we are going to keep a nominating committee, we need to make sure that every single candidate gets the exact same questions and the exact same amount of time. Having served on a nominating committee, that did not happen. I asked the same questions of the candidates, but we didn't have a predefined set of questions that we were asking everyone. And that by definition is a biased process, in my opinion. I'm sure you agree. So there are again, like to Rebecca's point, it's like we're dealing with like framework here, and then we know we're gonna have to get into like the specifics and nuances.
Great.
So yeah, I'm just stepping away as a co-chair of the committee for 1 second to say that I think we really have to understand that we are a public agency. We are essentially an entity of local government, and therefore we have a responsibility. And I think we need to ensure that, of course, we have fair elections, but also that we have a process that ensures we have due diligence in terms of picking all of the different board officers. We have secretaries. I've been secretary. This is my 3rd term as secretary. It's not easy. You know, you have to have XYZ qualification to be a secretary. It's not a glamorous job. But it is the only way we can ensure we fulfill our qualifications, in the charter and have a public record. So I think we need to ensure that no matter what option we choose, we have a way of ensuring candidates for each office are qualified. Even when it comes to 2nd and 1st vice chair, they do a lot of grunt work. I mean, I'm thinking of Tricia, who was 2nd vice chair and then briefly 1st vice chair before she left. There is so much work behind the scenes that she did, and she was the perfect person to do that because she was such a hard worker. I think I will only be comfortable personally with a process going forward that ensures we have some type of way to ensure we have qualified people in all these positions, especially since if we spend a big chunk of our time at a full board meeting on an election, that's taking away time that we're asked to give the public and their issues and to hear their comments. So I just ask that everyone think of that when we vote on whatever option.
Yeah, I'd like to make sure that we can, if someone, we've had discussions and we're going to have further discussions, but I'd like to maybe if people feel moved to actually recommend a course of action, and then we could see whether or not that's supported by the group here and stuff like that. And
sure, I feel like I told Michelle she could speak briefly. If we could just let at least Michelle speak briefly, Chuck. If that's
fine. She may want to go ahead, Michelle.
And then Sahar, I'm so excited you raised your hand. Let's please call on her after.
Thank you. Yes. What I wanted to say was this. I'm hearing some of the tweaking that we could do if we had the nominating committee that would satisfy everybody. And I want to say that that's perfectly acceptable. As I said before, the confidentiality was put in place to protect the applicant, not the committee, so that the applicant, the thing that they applied would not be made public if they did not want it to be made public. That was the reason for confidentiality. If this group feels that confidentiality is not important in the nominating committee, well, we can have a nominating committee and not have confidentiality. And let's see how that works. People talking to the nominating committee, the nominating committee sharing with everybody who the applicants were, when they were interviewed, et cetera, et cetera. The applicants are free to do that. If you feel that that's the better way to go, then that's one of the things we can tweak in the nominating committee. The other thing is the nomination from the floor. That is a backstop. I think that's a good thing, because for some of you who were concerned that 7 people are putting forth a slate, but remember, it's 7 people who you have voted for. The nominations for the 7 people came from the floor and they got the majority vote. So that meant that they were put there because people thought their judgment would be good. But if you're concerned that only 7 people are putting forth a slate, then there should be a backstop, a control, which is nominations from the floor. And in the past, that has run very smoothly. So I think with those 2 tweaking changes, depending, how you want to write them, which we can discuss that later on. But to me, if that's everybody's main concern about the nominating committee, I think we should feel comfortable going forward with the nominating committee. I want to also reiterate that Rebecca, when she talked about some boards having an election committee, she also explained to us that they function like our nominating committee. So in fact, they don't function like the description of the election committee that was given to us tonight. That's a completely different
Well, no,
concept.
there's a blend. Just to be clear, there's a blend. Like there's a lot of different variations.
Okay, I didn't get that from.
No, there's really only 3 out of 12 that have an election committee that's similar to what we have. The majority is a nominating committee, whether it's called a nominating committee or election
not.
committee.
Okay, well, that's what I understood. So to me, I would not like to see this throw like the baby with the bathwater. You want to tweak it, let's go ahead and tweak it. But I certainly would use it as a framework, and I recommend very strongly that we do. And also bear in mind that it's a difficult process to change things. You have to go through this process, which is a difficult process. And I respect the hard work that everybody's done, but it is changeable. And I wouldn't at this moment go through a very dramatic change. I'm more comfortable with what we're calling tweaking or changes to address the concerns of people than I am in doing something so dramatic that isn't tried and true. So with those in mind, and if you wanted to make that part of a resolution, include just those 2 tweaks, because we haven't had a thorough discussion, with the understanding that at the next meeting, a more thorough discussion could be had. That's all.
I would not want us, if this might be a little inappropriate as a co-chair, but I don't think we should get into the details because I think there's so much to be discussed. If someone makes a motion, they should just focus on kind of the overwhelming sense of the option that we laid out. I think,
Rebecca, if I can respectfully respond to that, the people who are having concerns about the nominating committee have specifically primarily addressed the confidentiality issue and the voting from the floor. And I think to put the nominating committee out as an option without reassuring these people who are on this call tonight that those would be part of the nominating committee, while with the complete understanding that it's not a thorough description, with the complete understanding that this will be filled out further, but at least they would feel more comfortable going further, knowing that and knowing that their couple of primary concerns would be included tonight. Otherwise, I think you're not giving them any reason for confidence to go forward.
So then I would just ask that whoever makes that motion, if that's the motion that is made, would include the aspect of giving kind of each board member's history and service on the nominating committee as part of that stipulation. And that also, when it comes to confidentiality, we will determine at the next meeting whether or not a candidate who is not chosen can ask for their name not to be mentioned at all. I don't want to ever be in a situation where we vote on something that discourages anyone from running for
Agreed.
kind of fear of embarrassment. And while I understand the other side of the concerns about confidentiality, and I get it and I respect it, I also think it did serve a great function that enabled kind of fresh new members like me to run in the first place when I did. And I just
Well,
want to
I
make
agree
sure
with
there's
that.
Yeah,
They
but
should
also,
be
like, just to be
protected. That
clear,
was the
Michelle,
original concept.
sure, Michelle, that original concept that you're describing in practice, it does not bear true. I am telling you, I served on a nominating committee, and no one explained to me that the
Diana,
confidentiality clause was about
we
the
agree.
anonymity of the person. I was told I couldn't talk about anything that happened in the nominating committee.
No,
So,
well,
do you know what I mean? So it's like that wasn't clear, and so
okay.
it made it feel like if I had questions about the process, that I couldn't call you
That
or
was not
Chuck.
true. Whoever told you that, that was not true. But at any rate, we're clearing it up
I'm
tonight.
not putting
That's the
blame on
point.
anyone. I'm just saying that, like, when you're a new member, it's like it's made very clear the nominating committee is a confidential process, and what happens in that Zoom room doesn't leave that Zoom room, which
I
is
don't know, just about the people to protect
well,
them.
that's
Anyway,
very
it's been
unclear.
clarified. It's been
Great.
clarified.
If
So
we could
we can go
unmute,
forward.
thank you, Michelle. If we could unmute, Sahar and I, welcome to the board, and thank you for joining us this evening. Really excited to have you here, and please tell me if I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sahar. So yeah,
Sahar,
you're
sorry.
pronouncing it right. No, you're pronouncing it right. And I'm very excited and really I was quietly listening and learning a lot from each one of you. So I think you guys have done so much work. The three of you, the three co-chairs. So I've been constantly reading while listening to everyone. So for personally, I feel like the second one is the option I would go with because I feel like it's so transparent. It kind of is, I feel it's a great mix of it picks up good points from the first and the third option because it's so transparent. You have multiple people who are interviewed. So you are taking away a process and reducing the time factor, which I think is great. But then again, there's so many people, everybody will be offered an option. And people are also coming in to speak, so expressing about themselves. I believe it's in the October meeting that you guys have mentioned. So I feel like it's taking everything into account. And as a new board member, that's what I feel very comfortable with because I would get to hear everyone who wants to be nominated, who wants to stand up for a position. I'll get paperwork about them. I can read about them and make a calculated decision which one should be there. And I'm assuming the committee, you all are veterans, have experience. So you will choose the individuals who I was listening and I agree with that. The ones who can serve as well, because you do need particular required, requirements like for a secretary, this stuff, and that you are checking. So I would be very comfortable as a board member voting that have been. My only one thing that I wanted to ask was, and again, as I'm a new board member, so please pardon my ignorance, for the first option, if we assume that everybody decides to take away that confidentiality aspect, which I know we've been conversing about and discussing at length, if we take away that is not, then everybody votes against it, it changes in the bylaws. Is there an option just to make it even more transparent with the nominating committee that people, like anyone, like for instance, myself, that when you are interviewing, I have the option of just showing up, quietly listening, not interfering with any of the process, but be a bystander and just listen to it so that then no one can say that it wasn't transparent and there were any biases because anyone can drop in and listen to any of the interviews.
So I have to research that a little bit more just because of open meetings laws and enabling kind of public participation in any public meeting. I actually think the other aspect of the confidentiality that existed in the prior nominating committee was to enable a very organized, clearly run interviews. I mean, they meet with each candidate at who knows what hour of what day. So I think just procedurally, if there's a way that we can have nominating committees open to the public and open to other members of the board to attend and not participate. If there's a loophole, I think that's something we can explore if that's the option that comes out of this committee. I will just say, and again, I guess I'm stepping aside as chair one more time. I want to make sure that if that's the option we're going for, there's a way to ensure that kind of young, new people still feel comfortable running for office. And I'm just worried if we decide to allow other participation, if it's possible, that it might scare some people from taking a shot. And I also think with the election committee that you could theoretically, we could have them give a report without giving a slate at the full board, and therefore every single candidate will still have to be nominated from the floor. But I'm a little worried about voting on anything too specific tonight, because I think there's so many things to be fleshed out.
And we'll submit that question to the Manhattan Borough President's office. My sense is, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chuck, who has many more years of experience than me in this area, but what you're describing sounds more like an executive committee session of the board where then anybody, like essentially we do have actions that we take as a board that members of the public are not part of, hiring decisions, right? And so I think that would turn it, I would love that kind of situation, but then I think then we're talking about a whole nother scenario where there is then just an executive committee session where we're all sort of part of a process. And it's not like you would be able to join silently. You would be a board member that, I think, Chuck, right? Am I guessing that correctly?
Yeah, no, that's right. And we've never done that. And there's no problem under the bylaws or under any other laws of having a process, an internal board process of election for officers that is not open to the public or even open to other board members.
I wasn't actually thinking of opening it to the public because it is an election that, but I was thinking of like, if it can be open to the other board members. I totally understand the point about the timing factor, but then if it is like maybe a document like a Google Doc or something that's shared with the 50 board members, and that just says that like if whenever you're meeting with one candidate, you just put it there. If anyone is so interested to find out that there is transparency, they want to see, they should like keep checking that Google Doc for whenever the next interview will happen. So it falls on a person like me, if I'm so interested, that I should keep checking and then I come in. But it should only be open to the board members, because at the end of the day, they'll be the one making the decision of, for the candidates. But just to keep it still selective and not open it to the public. And then again, a person like me should not be allowed to speak, only to hear and only to listen.
Yeah, and so what I was describing, and I'm sorry, because I know it's confusing, but like, again, I just got reappointed to my second term, but I still consider myself a newbie, so I feel you. Like a lot of things are not explained. When I said executive committee, I mean there are actually times when we are having a full board meeting or a committee, right, like where members of the public are present, and we actually go into a breakout room, and it's an executive. So that's what I meant, where it's like only members of the board are present in that room. So that's sort of what you're describing, which I see. And what I'm saying is I do not believe that the Manhattan Borough President's rules would then allow us to then silence you, right? Like we can't silence you. You're a member of the board. We are now in executive committee session. So that's what I was saying. Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think, Sahar, if you look at the election committee alternative or scenario, that's the idea where you're supposed to have all the questions and answers of all the candidates that would be put in the minutes. So every board member could look at that and could decide based on the questions and answers whether or not they liked one candidate or didn't like another candidate.
Yeah,
that'd be as close as you get to where talking about the transparency that we were mentioning.
The second one seems actually perfect. Everything seems to be covered on that one. So thank you so much for answering my question.
Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us, and thank you for doing all your research and homework and reading all the minutes. Welcome.
Welcome to the board, Sahar, too.
And I have to say, Sahar has attended the other committee that I coach one of the other committees I co-chaired, and she's already proven herself to be a very active board member. So I'm so grateful that she came again tonight.
I hope this committee meeting didn't scare you away.
It scared a lot of people away, obviously.
We have Alita. I just want to recognize that we have Alita, Craig, and Rita, whose hands are up, and they have all spoken and are members of the board. I'm just curious if, if you have
I think
new
we
items
should
to share,
ask-
or if you're gonna propose a motion. I would like to know.
I think we should just double check at this moment, because again, this is the bylaws. It's a big change. If there's anyone who has not spoken,
I see
who
Judy
wants to
Schneider.
participate,
Judy
please raise your
Schneider
hand.
just joined. I think Judy Schneider just joined. Yeah, right.
She doesn't have her hand up though, so I'm
No.
trying to gather, like, there are three board members, if anyone has a motion, or if they're sharing new opinions.
And I ask, we just, again, if before
Judy's
we
on,
call
she
the
hears
question,
us,
we
she knows,
make
she's
sure
been on for more
people-
than a minute, she's been on for like 10 minutes, so I think if she wanted to speak, she would have raised her hand. So all three of you have new information to share? Great, then let's call on you in order. Alita?
I'll be brief. I'd like to make sure that the option for the candidates, or the requirement that they give speeches, be kept. I have trouble voting blanketly on one of these options because the devil's in the details. And finally, I'd like to suggest that there be a review session of this, of whatever procedure is enacted after the board election in November, to be able to go over, while it's still fresh in everyone's minds, what worked, what didn't work, and then to tweak if necessary. And that's it. Thank you.
Good thought, Alita. Review session after the election, yeah. I guess Craig is next. Craig?
So I'd like to make a motion, and if seconded, speak to it. I'd like to make a motion that a committee with a name to be determined, but I would prefer election committee, be formed that conducts business in the following manner. It would require that all candidates be asked the same questions. It would not permit nominations from the floor after interviews occur. It would include mechanisms to provide a diverse set of members making up such a committee with a varying amounts of CB8 experience. It would not recommend or report out a slate, and therefore puts the onus on CB8 members to make conclusions based on the interviews and the work of committees. And the committee would then be tasked with moderating, conducting interviews at the full board meeting prior to the election. And then be it further resolved, because I'm not sure if this would fit within this, I also want to include that nominees for chair and first vice chair have a requirement that they have served at least one full year on CB8.
So just that I'm understanding correctly, Craig, you're literally not proposing a motion that addresses the three options we've been discussing for the past hour and 45 minutes. You're actually just like throwing something else out there?
Well, no, it's essentially the elections committee.
With amendments? Like, I just want to make sure, like.
I didn't want to just I was trying to hear and take into account some of the comments and feedback that was made. So essentially it's a form of it, but I want to include the central elements of it that we could further discuss if necessary. I didn't want to just take it fully as laid out, because I think there's some concerns that are.
I was just clarifying.
And then, as I said, a second, I don't know if it would be a second resolution or a second, be it further resolved regarding the level of experience for any chair or first vice chair candidates. And therefore, the second vice chair and secretaries would still be open for newer members. But this way we ensure that anyone who would potentially be acting as the moderator of or the chair of any given meeting would have at least that requisite experience.
Craig, I think that should probably be a separate motion. That's a whole other.
And that's fine. I'm happy to keep that separate.
Is there a second to that? Craig's motion. Does anybody second
Yeah,
that?
Is that a second from Felice?
Yeah, please.
Felice, okay, Felice is seconded. And you wanted, did you want to discuss any further, Craig?
No, I think it's pretty clear in terms of what I'm proposing, and it generally follows the elections committee. Again, I think I expressed, and I think others expressed, some discomfort in terms of the past chairs or a past chair having to be a member of it. And no disrespect to you, Chuck, but I think if we were going back, we could have a committee that would be dominated by past chairs, and I don't think that would be ideal either.
I don't think you're going to have that happen.
I don't think it's literally possible.
I don't.
No,
it's
it's
not possible.
actually, it's not possible because of term limits.
Right.
And I'm going to use my raised hand now. I know other people, Rita, have their hands raised.
Well,
I
we
will
haven't
not be
second
able
on
to-
a motion though, Rebecca.
Yeah, no, but it's a motion. It's not a call to question. So
Yeah.
discussion is still
Okay.
able to partake. I will never support anything that attaches stipulations to officers running for the board. I think there is a chance that we could have a great person who wants to be first vice chair or second vice chair who's newly appointed. I know you didn't specifically mention secretaries, but I ran for secretary via the nominating committee after my first few months on the board. I think I've done a good job, and I would never limit the pool that we have, especially with term limits and the fact that people don't have as long to serve the board in the fullest way.
So why don't we, as Chuck said,
That's
why don't we
separate.
make that a separate resolution, and we only focus on the main question right now, which is the.
Yeah.
I think essentially Craig's motion is the election committee option with a few little tweaks here, but we can get, in fact, if that's what the board decides, then next month we would go into that in much better, greater detail.
Yeah,
and I would also, sorry, Craig, I would just ask everyone to be respectful of the fact that this is a huge decision. So before you call to question, please make sure you allow other people to comment.
Yeah.
Back to you, Craig.
Maybe Judy Schneider who hasn't spoken.
Yeah, let's call on Judy.
Can we unmute Judy? Okay, Judy. go
Hi,
ahead.
all. Sorry, we had an event tonight. Sorry, I'm late. I didn't hear the whole discussion, but I think my preference would still be for the nominating committee with some stipulations on that. So I don't think I could vote along with Craig.
Thank you, Judy.
Okay,
Can we unmute Rita next?
I just want to thank the committee for the work that they did. It's a lot of work. And the reason that things have changed on our board is the demographics of our board have changed. And we have a lot of nice young people.
Agreed.
And younger people have aspirations beyond the community board, where us old fogies were very happy to do it. So I just want you to know that I recognize that, and that's why I give you a lot of credit, because I know that you're taking it from a different perspective, and thank you.
Thanks, Rita. If we can unmute Kaz and then Ed.
Oh, I thought Ed was before me. I was going to call the
Everybody keeps telling me I'm getting the order wrong, but am I
that's
crazy or is Kaz first?
Well, it doesn't matter. I was going to call the question, but I would defer to Ed, and I thought there was
Well,
somebody
Ed
else.
just wrote yes, so I think he agrees that you were first.
Okay, call the question.
Well, no, Ed, just give a thumbs up instead of the chat, because that's kind of what we do, and we did ask for.
Ed, we don't understand what your yes and no's are, so.
Just thumbs up if you're seconding.
He's not doing that. He's doing yeses and no's, so I'm asking him
So
to
then
do what
raise
you're
your
asking.
hand if you're not seconding Cause's motion.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
So is there a second to the cause's motion to call the question?
So I'm not seconding, and I would like to comment before we call the question. Thank you for unmuting me.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly to Craig's point, I know we're not talking about it, but I think he made a very good point about qualifications. And yes, there's always a new person that superstar and a rising star for later. But with respect to running the board, I do agree with Craig that if you're going to be running for chair, that it would give a lot of confidence to people to know that you've been on the board more than 1 year. I would even suggest that you've been on the board for at least a term, and I would even go further to say that you've run a committee, because as people on this board know, it's not easy, and you're going to take a lot of incoming, and it's very common to have hundreds of. We go back to person. I know, Chuck, but that's all I was going to say is.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that that's not on the table right now. We're talking about the election committee option. We separated that out, that issue. So that's going to come next if Craig wants to put that forward.
Okay.
But I understand. But
can I ask, what is the exact motion? Because we don't have it written, and there's a lot of amendments. So what is the exact thing?
It's really it's a vote for the election committee option with a few tweaks, which we'll get to. And the tweaks we'll get to next month if that's what the board agrees to.
So we're voting for. I just want to be clear. So we're voting for the election committee with future tweaks that we don't know about.
Well, there were some things that Craig had.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking for. That's what I'm asking for. So
I think we need clarification as to whether Craig is taking any of the comments I said a little bit out of turn, and I apologize for that, but I don't think we should have stipulations for every board office.
See, we're back to that issue, Chuck.
Right.
No,
yeah.
we're not.
I was going to say, let's hold
That's
off.
not the issue. We're not talking about that.
Can I pull that resolution and then
Yes.
then remake the motion after we finish this discussion?
But the cause wants to call the question.
Right. So he's calling out. Right. So we agreed before that that's going to be handled separately.
So what is the motion? What is the motion? Just tell me. Someone just read it to me. That's all.
Yeah. So the motion is that CB8 would form an election committee that conducts business in the following manner. And excuse me that the wording isn't perfect, but it would be required to ask the same questions of all candidates. It would not allow nominations from the floor after interviews occur. It would include mechanisms to provide a diverse set of members making up such a committee with a varying level of CB8 experience. And that's meant to ensure that new members do participate on an election committee. That such committee doesn't recommend or report out a slate, therefore putting the onus on members to make conclusions based on the interviews and the work of the committee and the information that is made publicly available, and that the committee is in charge of moderating any interviews that take place at the full board meeting prior to the election.
You don't mean interviews, I don't think. You meant the speeches.
Speeches, yes, speeches I meant. Sorry, you're right.
Yeah.
I apologize. I wrote interviews, but I meant speeches.
That's okay. So that's the motion that's on the floor.
Okay.
And now Koss has called the question. Is there a second on that?
Can everyone lower their hands so that we can get a clear sense of who's actually seconding the, thank you. Michelle, is that a second? It is not? Okay.
No, that's not.
Okay. Judy, is that?
No, there's.
There is a second to Craig's motion from Felice, but there is no call to question because we just got further clarification. So I think we should unmute Judy.
Yeah, when Craig read that list, I guess I missed it the first time when he made the motion. I have a problem with there not being allowed to have members from the floor nominated. So I could not vote for that motion.
Thank you.
Can I just respond just in case you missed it? I think the the intent was that, in the discussion we had, was that if one of the challenges we've had with the nominating committee is that the committee would conduct its business and then someone would be nominated from the floor after the committee conducted its business, and therefore that person nominated from the floor would bypass the entire process. So this was just
Not necessarily, because let's say two
Judy.
people, let's say A and B are running for president. They come to the nominating committee. The nominating committee nominates A. B doesn't get nominated. Then somebody from the floor wants to nominate B. I
Judy,
think
right.
they
Judy,
walk through
In
the
this
Wait a
case, there
second,
wouldn't be recommendations, so it wouldn't be an issue.
Right. That's the point, Judy. The point is, under this election committee, the committee would not make a recommendation. So all candidates would come before the committee. The committee would interview them. They would make the questions and answers in minutes that would be available to all board members. And that's when it came to the board, there would be no further nominations from the floor, because you've already had all the candidates be interviewed, and there's been no specific recommendation from the committee. So there shouldn't be any necessity for anybody to be nominated from the floor. And if they nominated from the floor, they would have bypassed the process of being asked the questions in the committee that everyone has looked
I get
at.
that. I understand now. I didn't understand that before. Okay. Thank you.
So I'm calling on myself again. I'm stepping aside. I still can't support it because I think anyone should be able to be nominated from the floor, given maybe they read the minutes of that election committee and decide they can't find someone that they're confident in to be X, Y, or Z officer. So I will not support any resolution or vote in favor of any resolution that does not allow for nominations from the floor at the October
Okay, you
meeting.
can vote on that if it comes to a vote. I just think as coaches, we should really try to stop doing this. Can we call on Kaz?
Did he call a question? That's what he's going
He
to call
has
the
his
question.
hand up again.
Yeah, I called the question and then they went nowhere. So I'm calling the question. I mean, all these things can be, all we're voting on is 1, 2, or 3. All the minute points will be worked out at the next meeting. So let's not get to the nitty-gritty yet. Let's just vote 1, 2, 3. And at the moment, 2 is on the floor, so I'm calling the question.
Michelle,
second to that.
Michelle seconded it, yes.
Yep.
Okay, all right.
And just
So-
a reminder, please use the thumbs up if you're seconding. Don't raise your actual hand because it dilutes the pile of people who.
So we probably should have a vote.
I
But
agree.
Judy has a
Should have
point
a
of
vote.
information, so
Yes.
Judy, go ahead.
If I understand you correctly, if we pass this resolution, it doesn't go to the full board for. a
No, it
vote.
does. It does. It's going to the full board.
And then what do we do at the next meeting? I'm not understanding the
If the
process.
full board approves this, then we flesh out the mechanics of how this is actually going to operate.
Okay, thank you.
Should we call out the members individually on this?
I think so.
So you like me to unmute everybody in order?
That would be lovely.
Okay.
In order of last name, please.
That one's not going to happen. All right, Rita, I'm going to lower your hand. And do you have a point of information, or is this?
No, she's going to vote.
No. Okay. Then, so we're going to start with. What was that?
Abstain.
Oh, abstain. Okay, I'm going to get to you in order of alphabetical.
Oh, okay, rude.
So, I'm sorry. All right. Let me put everybody's hands down, mute everybody. So I'm going to start with everybody who's not a committee co-chair, and then we'll go to the co-chairs last. So starting in alphabetical order by first name, Alita Camp.
Yes.
Yes on the resolution. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
And if you don't mind, mute yourself whenever you're done, because it's a
Okay.
little easier for me.
Okay.
That's for everybody.
I'll set a good example.
Thank you. Cause.
Yes.
Thank you, Cause. Craig Later.
Yes.
Thank you, Craig. Ed Hartzog.
No.
Thank you, Ed. Felice Farber.
Yes.
Thank you, Felice. Judy Schneider.
Abstain.
Thank you, Judy. Michelle Birnbaum.
No.
Thank you, Michelle. Rita Popper.
Abstain.
Thank you, Rita. Sahar.
Yes.
Thank you, Sahar. Sherry Weiner.
Yes.
Thank you, Sherry. Vanessa.
Yes.
And then our co-chairs. Chuck.
Yes.
Rebecca.
No.
Taina.
Yes.
Thank you. I hope somebody recorded this.
I got you.
Yeah.
Give me 1 second.
She's the secretary She's of the board.
I think it was, well, good, Rebecca. It definitely passed from what I saw, but. Alita, are you trying to change your vote? Can you just, yes, no, can you nod? So we
I
know?
had a question about, no, I just had a question about the next meeting because the bylaws
Yeah,
provide that you
let's let
cannot
Rebecca
vote
give the
if you,
full. Yeah, we'll get to that in a second.
okay.
So the motion carried by a total of 8 yes, 4 no, and 2 abstentions. That is quite close. So I would also say, we have to prepare for the full board vote. And if before we can adjourn, maybe we can have some further commentary, just like maybe a re-clarification of what this was, because that to me is not the overwhelming kind of committee support of one option that I thought we were going to get tonight. Oh, Jane Partial is back. She did not vote. Jane, this was in support of disbanding the nominating committee and having an election committee. I don't know if you wanted to clarify your vote, because currently you're voting yes in favor of the election committee over the
Oh,
nominating
no,
committee.
I prefer the nominating committee. Thank you.
Okay, so this passed by essentially 1 vote.
Well, not really. We have no's and abstentions. Let's not try to comment on that. It passed. So can we call?
No.
Rebecca,
abstentions are no's.
it passed, and we should stop making commentary on the level to which it passed. You are being incredibly biased right now, Rebecca. I am sorry. Okay?
Well, listen, hold on, let's not get, it has to go to the full board, and so we'll have.
Of course it does, but
we'll
let's
have a
not
lot
make
of
comments
discussion.
on by how much it passed. It passed, and we should not comment on whether it passed by a lot or a little. It will go to the full board.
I think Craig laid it, and I think we have a pretty good sense. Craig, if you want to send into the board office your notes on that of what
It's
you
actually in the
proposed. So
chat,
we have
Chuck.
it.
I think Will, did you put that in the chat already? Literally everything that he had sent?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's in
Oh,
the
you did?
chat. The
Oh, it's
last
in-
bullet
oh.
should, the
Oh, it's
last
in the-
bullet needs to be changed. It should be moderates speeches.
It's,
not
oh, okay.
interviews.
Oh, okay, so it's in there. So, okay. Okay, sorry. I didn't realize. Okay.
No, but what's in the chat includes the aspect of not allowing nominations from the floor. I thought
that's in there.
That's in there. Yeah, it doesn't allow it from the floor. Yeah.
So we still have a few hands raised, I believe.
Well, Alita wanted to say something, I
Four.
guess, too. I don't
And
know.
now Ed, Vanessa, and Cos have their hands up.
I just had a question because I think our bylaws prevent people from voting if they come in the middle of a discussion. And so I was just raising that for the next meeting. If we have people there that have not been at this meeting, how you will proceed, just raising it in advance. That's it. Thank you.
she was at the beginning of the meeting. She was here for a large part. She
No,
was
no, no,
only-
I'm not addressing anyone now. I'm just saying that if someone comes to the next meeting who wasn't here now, will they be, it's just a question about voting at the next meeting if they didn't participate in this. I could see that the argument would be that the details are a whole new topic, but I'm just flagging it so that it's something that you guys can think about in advance of the next meeting. It has nothing to do with anyone who was here tonight at all, whenever they came.
Okay, thanks, Lee.
Thank you.
Ed Hartzog, I guess we talked.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. I just want to throw out just some logistical concerns or thoughts. It's June. This will go to full board, I guess, next week. It's not fleshed out, so we'll have a meeting in July. Then we're into the elections in September. So just in terms of, I don't want to talk about the differential on the vote, but let's just put it this way, there's a wide swath of opinion. I think that's a fair assessment. And the point is, if we're just going to have the one meeting in July and we have our usual no meeting in August, I fear that we'll have done an entire year, nothing will have changed in time for the next election, because as you so keenly point out, we start up anew in September. So I guess what I'm saying is maybe contemplating a meeting in August for this committee.
Well, it's possible we might have to do that, Ed, but we're hoping if well, first we have to get direction from the full board and whether or not they support this concept or another concept. And then we'll have to see what we can do in July, if we can make enough progress.
That's exactly what I had said before. I had asked to have a reserved August date for this committee with Will, because I anticipated that this conversation might be extended. I also mentioned that, we can go to Russell and ask for a special meeting of the board. That's the only way the change to the bylaws can be adopted before the September meeting. And I don't think by stating that the vote was 5-2 or whatever is me being kind of out of line or
well, we can agree to disagree.
No, let me finish my point. It goes to the point that this was not what we had envisioned happening.
I've never seen you in a full board meeting say that something either passed by a lot or by a little. And so I just think it's inappropriate to comment. Everybody hears the numbers. That's what I'm saying. I'm also getting text messages from board members that are on right now that are saying that our numbers were wrong. So I actually think, Will, it's really important that we, before we adjourn, actually make sure that we have the yeses and nos correct.
Okay, I can read. I will read it out then if people are texting you that they're concerned. Alita Camp, yes. Cause, yes. Craig, yes. Ed, no. Felice, yes. Judy, abstain. Michelle, no. Rita, abstain. Sahar, yes. Sherry, yes. Vanessa, yes. Chuck, yes. Rebecca, no. Taina, no. That's 1, 2, 3. And then Jane was a no.
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 yeses. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 no's. And that is 2 abstentions. So the vote is accurate. Ed?
No, not all. I have no. I just was throwing out that we may need an August meeting. That's all. I was just throwing that out there to us to be ready, because again, I think that we're probably, Chuck. Let's put it this way: hope springs eternal. But I've been on the board a while, and I'm just not trying to be the voice of doom, just trying to practicality. That's all.
Rebecca, did you just read me as a no?
No, I read you as a yes.
You read me as a no.
Okay, then.
That is what I thought I heard.
Okay, so then we'll make that change.
Yes, so it's actually 9.
Nevertheless.
Ed's hand is down. We have Cause, Craig, and Judy.
Rather than keep flogging a dead horse, can I move to adjourn?
You definitely can.
Is there a second to that?
Yes.
Sherry seconds that. Okay. That's okay. So I think basically we are adjourned. That's a preferential motion. And I appreciate everybody's work on this and thoughts, and to be continued in July. and hopefully we'll have more participation, and we'll see. Well, we have to see what direction we get from the full board, obviously. And then we'll come back in July. And possibly, as Ed was saying, we may have to come back in August. We appreciate everybody's participation.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.